When Grace Whitmore's father collapsed at the pulpit, the sound of his body hitting the floor was louder than any sermon he'd ever given. She didn't remember screaming. Only the echo of her heels clattering against the sanctuary floor, her hands trembling as she cradled his head, the way his eyes fluttered, then went still. Now, 12 hours later, the hospital room buzzed low with machines that blinked and beeped without compassion. Reverend Samuel Whitmore, the man who baptized half the county and never missed a sunrise, lay unmoving beneath sterile white sheets. Grace hadn't cried. Not yet. Crying meant she had time to fall apart, and she didn't. The doctor had spoken gently, but the words still sliced. Stroke. Aggressive. Long-term care. Insurance wouldn't cover it all. A place in the Neurologic Rehabilitation Center across the river was out of reach. She had already emptied savings when her mother passed 2 years ago, and now even her car was running on borrowed prayers. She sat alone by the window, one hand curled around a paper coffee cup she hadn't sipped from in hours. The hospital air was dry, her throat tighter than her budget. The sun was beginning to sink outside, casting long golden streaks through the blinds, when the knock came. She turned, expecting a nurse. Instead, Grant Callahan walked in. Tall, crisp, devastatingly calm. He didn't wear a suit, just dark slacks and a tailored button-down shirt that cost more than her monthly rent. But it was his presence that froze her breath. Savannah knew him by reputation. The Callahan heir, a tech magnate with fingers in finance, smart cities, and clean energy. He had descended on their old town a year ago, offering to restore half the historic district through his foundation. People called him generous. People also called him cold. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm sorry to intrude." She stood automatically, defensive. "Mr. Callahan?" He offered a short nod. "I was at the service this morning." Of course. He'd been sitting in the back row, sunglasses in hand. She remembered thinking how strange it was to see someone so perfectly polished in the second pew of a weathered church. "I hope your father recovers swiftly," he continued. "He's well regarded." Grace's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. "Thank you. He's strong." "I'm sure he is." Grant stepped further into the room. "But strength doesn't pay medical bills." Her eyes snapped to his. "Excuse me?" "There's no delicate way to say this, so I'll be direct. I know what the facility across the river costs. I also know you've already applied for 2 grants, both denied." Her pulse skidded. How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know things." He said it with such clinical calm it felt like a diagnosis. "I also know you're in debt, behind on rent, and the house deed is in your father's name, not yours." Grace's stomach turned. "What exactly are you doing here?" He looked at her then, not as a banker might examine a failing ledger, but as someone assessing potential return. "I'm here," he said slowly, "because I need a wife." Silence. Thick. Stunned. She stared. What? Not in the romantic sense." His tone didn't waver. "A legal wife. A marriage of convenience. A strategic partnership." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "This is a hospital. My father just had a stroke. And you're pitching me a proposal?" Grant didn't flinch. "Your father needs around-the-clock care." "I can provide that. I can fund the best rehabilitation center in the Southeast. You can focus on being a daughter instead of a desperate caretaker." Her mouth opened. Closed. He stepped closer. "In exchange," he said, "you marry me. Publicly. For 1 year. Appear at functions." Fulfill social expectations. Nothing intimate is required. You will live at my residence. You will be provided for. After 1 year, we divorce amicably. You'll keep the money, and if you wish, a trust fund in your father's name. Grace's hands trembled, but she didn't speak. The board of my company is voting on my succession clause in 90 days, he added. Their approval hinges on public image and stability. A polished wife, well-spoken, grounded, with strong local ties, is an asset. Her throat burned. So I'm an asset. He met her gaze. Yes, but I pay my assets very well. There was no flirtation in his tone. No charm, only strategy. Grace turned back toward the hospital bed. Her father's face was pale. One of his hands, once so strong, twitched slightly beneath the sheet. Grant's voice lowered. You can say no, but consider the cost. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Her chest was tight, her breath shallow. He left a slim folder on the windowsill and stepped back. I'll give you until tomorrow. And then he left. The room was silent again, except for the machines that ticked like a countdown clock. Grace stared at the folder. She didn't touch it. She sat there for a long time, hours maybe, until her coffee went cold and the hallway lights dimmed. Until the weight of it all settled in her bones like southern humidity. And when her father stirred in his sleep, his fingers curling slightly toward her, the tears finally came. Quiet, hot, unstoppable. She didn't cry because of the deal. She cried because this man, who'd always given her faith in goodness, needed something she couldn't give him. Unless... She wiped her eyes with the edge of her sweater. No one ever talks about how lonely it is to be strong. She took the folder, opened it. The ink was sharp. The language, clinical. But her name was printed there, bold and black, Grace Eleanor Whitmore, and beneath it, in elegant type, proposed legal agreement of temporary marital union. Her thumb paused on the signature line. She didn't sign. Not yet. But the pen was in her hand. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Grace barely slept. She watched the shadows crawl across the hospital ceiling, the folder on the side table whispering to her in the quiet hours. She'd skimmed it twice, trying to make sense of a proposal that sounded more like a screenplay than real life. A marriage of convenience. A contract? With Grant Callahan, the coldest man in Chatham County? By morning, her mind was raw. Her father was stable, but not improving. Insurance had already started their soft decline, the kind that came with polite phrasing and a quiet, unfortunately. There was no miracle coming, no mysterious inheritance. Just the reality of a daughter staring down a future she couldn't afford. When the knock came, she knew who it would be. She opened the door to see Lila Boone standing there, a caramel latte in one hand and a manila envelope in the other. She didn't smile. I got your text, Lila said. So, what the hell is this? Grace stepped aside. Come in. They sat in the waiting lounge down the hall, its soft blue chairs too cheerful for the weight in her chest. Lila flipped through the proposal with the efficiency of someone who had passed the bar while planning her own wedding. He's serious, she muttered. Marriage, 1 year, no prenup. You get full medical funding and a sizable trust in your father's name. Grace said nothing. Lila closed the folder with a sharp snap. Grace, this is insane. It's not nothing, she whispered. It's not love either, Lila countered. It's a business deal dressed up in wedding lace. I know. Do you? Lila's eyes softened, but her voice stayed firm. Because you're one of the few people left in this town who still believes in vows meaning something. Grace looked down at her hands. He's offering something no one else can. And what does he want in return? Image. Optics. A wife that makes his board think he's stable. He needs a soft edge. And apparently, I look like one. Lila leaned forward. He doesn't know you at all, then. Grace almost smiled, but before she could reply, her phone buzzed. Unknown. Number. Your ride will arrive in 20 minutes. Of course he wouldn't come himself. Of course he'd send a car. Grace stood, smoothing her wrinkled skirt. I haven't said yes, she said. But you're going. I need answers. Lila sighed. Then I'm coming with you. The black car was already waiting outside the hospital, sleek, polished, and entirely out of place beside the faded red brick and cracked sidewalks. The driver gave a small nod, opened the door, and they climbed in without a word. They didn't speak during the ride either. Grace watched the streets change, from weathered storefronts and mom-and-pop diners to the wrought iron gates and manicured drives of Savannah's wealthiest zip code. The car slowed in front of a grand estate that looked like it belonged on a movie set. Ivy climbing the walls, windows tall as cathedral arches, and a front door carved from dark oak and pride. The driver led them inside, marble floors, silent halls. Air that smelled like money and something colder. Celeste Monroe was waiting in the foyer, not a hair out of place, tablet in hand, voice smooth as linen. Miss Whitmore. Mr. Callahan is in the West study. He's expecting you. Lila stepped forward. I'll need access to review the contract and any financials involved. Celeste blinked. And you are? Her counsel, and her best friend since we were 6, which means I know exactly how much ice cream she eats when she's scared and what face she makes when she's about to do something reckless. There was a pause. Celeste gave the faintest nod. Understood. Grace followed the hallway to a set of tall doors. She hesitated, then pushed them open. Grant stood at the far end of the room, staring out through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a stretch of oaks and Spanish moss. He didn't turn. You came. I need clarity, she said. He finally turned, his expression unreadable. Clarity or reassurance? Grace ignored the question. Why me? He took a slow breath. You're poised. You're intelligent. You carry yourself like someone who doesn't need to speak loudly to be heard. That's not an answer. Why not someone else? Someone who actually wants to marry you. I don't want someone who wants me. That stopped her. I want someone who understands the terms, he said. Who won't complicate this? Who can play the role and leave when the year ends? Grace looked at him, his perfect clothes, his perfect posture, the way his words never seemed to touch anything vulnerable. You think I'm simple? No, he said. I think you're controlled, and that makes you reliable. She let the silence sit for a moment. Is that why you're like this? She asked quietly. Because control is safer than feeling anything real? Something flickered in his eyes, just for a second. Then he straightened. My reasons aren't relevant. Maybe not to you, Grace stepped forward. But they are to me. He studied her. Is this the part where you walk out? He asked. No, she said. This is the part where I tell you the price. She walked past him to the side table, where the revised contract now sat. I keep my name. I keep my work. I keep my independence. Done. I'm not your property. You don't speak for me, and you don't decide for me. Understood. And when this ends, If it ends, I want the greenhouse. He blinked. Excuse me? The old one in the back. It's abandoned. You don't even use it. He looked at her for a long time, as if trying to see what that request actually meant. Finally, he nodded. Fine. She stepped back, heart pounding. We do this my way, or not at all. He moved toward the desk. Picked up a pen. I'm not asking for love, he said. Just your signature. She hesitated. Then reached for the pen, her fingers brushing his. Electric. Unexpected. Their eyes met. She signed. And somewhere, a storm rolled in over the Savannah River. Neither of them noticed. The Callahan estate was quiet. Too quiet. Grace stood just inside the front door, her worn leather bag clutched in both hands, surrounded by marble floors and silence. The driver had dropped her off just after sunset. The sky was still streaked with lavender and gold, but the house itself felt frozen, as if time didn't move here unless Grant told it to. Celeste appeared from a hallway like a shadow slipping into place. Welcome, Mrs. Callahan. Grace flinched slightly. The name didn't fit yet, like shoes half a size too big. Celeste offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Your room is ready. Shall I show you? Grace nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. They walked through a corridor that curved around the side of the house, lined with towering windows and art Grace couldn't name but recognized as expensive. The air smelled like lemon polish and something colder, clinical. This is the East Wing, Celeste said, her heels tapping like a metronome against the floor. You'll find it quieter here. Mr. Callahan prefers separation between personal and professional spaces. Of course he does. Celeste opened a tall white door. Grace stepped inside. It was beautiful. The kind of beauty that made you feel like you didn't belong in it. A canopied bed, ivory linens, a writing desk near a tall window that overlooked a garden gone wild. Shelves lined one wall, though only a few books filled them. At the far end, a private bathroom with silver fixtures and more marble, and in the corner on the windowsill, a small potted plant with 2 limp green leaves. Grace stared. Is that? Mr. Callahan said you had a fondness for this particular plant, Celeste said. He asked that it be moved in before your arrival. Grace stepped closer. The pot was old, the soil dry. Miss Fern looked even worse than she had in the hospital, but still alive. Grace smiled, just a little. Thank you. Celeste gave a small nod. Dinner will be at 7, in the formal dining room. You'll find an appropriate outfit in the closet. If you require anything else, dial 1 on the house phone. She turned to leave. Celeste? The woman paused. Have you worked for him long? Celeste's posture didn't change. 6 years. Do you like him? A flicker, barely visible. I respect him, she said, and then she was gone. Grace sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress barely shifted beneath her weight. She reached for Miss Fern, tilting the pot gently, her fingers brushing the cracked ceramic. You and me both, girl, she murmured. Just trying to survive in a house that doesn't want anything to bloom. She whispered to the plant, the way her mother used to. Just nonsense and softness. Then, with a sigh, she stood and walked to the closet. The dress waiting for her was midnight blue, elegant but understated. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. Grant Callahan didn't do mistakes, or emotion, or accidents. By the time she stepped into the dining room, the sun had dipped below the trees. The chandelier above the long table cast golden light across polished mahogany. The room was too large for 2 people. Every chair was perfectly aligned, every fork gleaming. Grant stood at the far end, reading something on his tablet. He looked up as she entered. "You're punctual. You're very predictable," she replied. His lips almost twitched. Almost. He gestured to the chair beside him. "Please." She sat, smoothing her skirt. The silence stretched. Finally, he spoke. "I trust the room is comfortable." "It's beautiful," she said, "but it doesn't feel lived in." "Neither do I." Grace blinked. He didn't elaborate. Dinner was brought in by a quiet housekeeper who never made eye contact. Lemon chicken, roasted vegetables, a salad arranged like art. They ate in silence for several minutes. Then Grace set down her fork. "What happens now?" Grant didn't look up. "We go to City Hall tomorrow morning. The license is filed. I've arranged for a photographer to take a few casual photos afterward." "Casual?" "For the media." "Of course." She picked up her wine glass. "And after that?" "We begin making appearances. The board meeting is in 6 weeks. Until then, we act the part. Dinners, a few charity events. Nothing too strenuous. And I just exist here in the meantime? You are welcome to continue your work. I've instructed Celeste to ensure you have everything you need." Grace exhaled, slow. "And what do you need from me, Mr. Callahan?" He finally looked at her then. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, restless and cold. "I need you to convince the world that I'm not alone." She studied him. "And are you?" The question hung between them, heavy, uninvited. He didn't answer. After a beat, he stood. "If you need anything, you'll find me in the West Study. Grant." He paused at the doorway. "I'm not a prop, and I won't be treated like one." His voice was quiet. "You signed the contract." "Yes," she said. "But I still get to be human." He didn't look back. "That remains to be seen." He left. Grace sat in the too-bright dining room, her hands curled around a glass of wine that suddenly tasted bitter. And in the east wing, beneath the dim glow of moonlight, Miss Fern leaned toward the window, toward the promise of something warmer, something still out of reach. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The Savannah courthouse was quieter than Grace expected. No crowds, no flashing cameras. Just sunlight filtering through tall windows and the sound of heels tapping against tile as she followed Grant down a narrow corridor toward the clerk's office. He walked like he did everything else, with precision. No hesitation. No wasted motion, as if he already knew what every step would cost and where it would land. She, on the other hand, felt like she was drifting. The blue dress she wore was hers. She'd insisted. It didn't belong to his world. Neither did the soft leather flats she'd owned for years or the silver locket tucked beneath her collar. A gift from her father when she turned 18. She needed something of herself today. Something real. Grant glanced back at her. "You're quiet. You're efficient," she replied. He didn't smile, but there was something, just the faintest flicker in his expression. "Is that your way of saying you're nervous?" She exhaled. "It's my way of saying this doesn't feel like a wedding." "It isn't." They reached the office. The clerk didn't blink when they handed over the papers, just stapled, stamped, and slid the final document across the counter. "You may kiss the bride," the woman said dryly, not even looking up. Grace tensed. Grant stepped forward, and then with calculated ease, he leaned in and brushed a kiss, barely a whisper, against her cheek. Her skin prickled at the warmth. Her breath hitched before she could catch it. It was over in seconds. The clerk handed them the certificate. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Callahan." Grant nodded once. "Thank you." They stepped back into the sun, the light too bright, the air thick with June heat. A black car waited at the curb. Grant opened the door for her without speaking. Inside, the silence was heavier. Grace stared out the window as the city blurred past. "That was fast." "Everything important usually is," he replied. She turned to him. "Is that what you think marriage is?" "Just another item on your checklist?" "It's an agreement," he said simply. "Mutually beneficial. Temporary." "Right," she murmured, her throat dry. "Temporary." When they arrived back at the estate, Celeste was waiting at the top of the stairs with her usual unshakable calm. "Welcome home," she said. "Mrs. Callahan." Grace gave her a tight smile and walked past her. The house felt different, not warmer, just heavier, like the papers they'd signed had sunk into the foundation. Later that afternoon, Grace wandered. The east wing was too quiet. She needed air, something that didn't smell like polish and contracts. She made her way through the back corridor, past the gallery of family portraits, all colorless, stiff, formal. Then down a side hall she hadn't noticed before, where the walls were bare and the air cooler. The door at the end opened onto a stone path, overgrown and half-forgotten. Beyond it stood the greenhouse. Its frame was iron, painted once white, now rusting in streaks. Glass panels cracked and smudged, moss climbing the edges like it wanted to reclaim what was left. Grace stepped inside. The air was warm, damp, earthy. Most of the shelves were empty. A few clay pots lay tipped over in the dirt. Dry vines curled along the corners. A single bench stood in the center, worn smooth by years. And yet, something about it felt like breath. She crossed to the far wall and found a small plaque, half covered in dust. "For Eleanor Callahan, may all that she planted continue to grow." Grace stared at the name. "Your mother?" she whispered. The voice behind her made her jump. "Yes!" Grant stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened. He looked not relaxed exactly, but less rigid, more human. Grace stepped aside. "I didn't know anyone still used this place." "No one does." She gestured toward the plaque. "She must have loved it here." He nodded once. "She did." There was a pause. The kind that stretches when two people aren't sure whether to step forward or retreat. "Why did you let it die?" Grace asked quietly. Grant's eyes darkened. "Because when she did, there wasn't much left to keep alive." The admission settled in her chest like a stone. She looked around. "It's not beyond saving. Some things aren't worth the effort." Grace turned to face him. "I don't believe that." He met her gaze. "I know." They stood there, the greenhouse creaking gently around them, the quiet like a third presence. "Why me, really?" she asked again. Not just the poised answer, the real one. Grant's jaw tightened. "Because you don't need me." Her brow furrowed. "That makes you harder to control," he added, "and harder to forget." Grace didn't know what to say to that, so she looked down at the floor, then back at the bench. "I'd like to bring some plants in," she said finally. "Maybe revive the place." He watched her carefully. "Do what you like." And then, before she could speak again, he turned and walked away. Grace stood alone, surrounded by glass and ghosts. She bent down, brushed the dust from the plaque with her sleeve, and whispered to no one, "I think you'd want this to bloom again." Then she stood and walked back to the house. Tomorrow, she would bring Miss Fern here. Tomorrow, something would grow. The Callahan Gala was only 4 days away. Grace stood in front of the closet in her room, staring at a row of gowns she didn't recognize. Silk, satin, chiffon. All in muted jewel tones, hand-selected by someone who knew how to dress a woman like a statement, not a person. She touched the sleeve of a deep emerald dress. The tag was still attached. It probably cost more than her entire car. Behind her, Miss Fern sat on the windowsill, already showing signs of revival. 2 new leaves had emerged, small, shy, but unmistakably green. Proof that something fragile could survive here, even thrive, if someone cared enough to try. She turned toward the mirror. The reflection staring back at her felt like someone in disguise, a woman learning to live in a house built for ghosts. A soft knock broke the quiet. She opened the door to find Celeste, perfectly composed as always, tablet in hand. "Your final fitting is at noon," Celeste said, "and Mr. Callahan asked me to remind you there will be a short interview with Savannah now, after the gala. Just 2 questions. Nothing invasive." Grace gave a small nod. "And he couldn't tell me that himself?" Celeste hesitated just for a second. "He's been focused on preparations. This event means a great deal to the foundation." Grace didn't answer. The silence stretched between them. Celeste's eyes softened, just slightly. "It's not personal." "With him, it rarely is." That should have made her feel better. It didn't. Later that afternoon, she wandered the back of the estate with pruning shears and a small watering can. The greenhouse was beginning to take shape again. She'd spent 2 days scrubbing the floor, coaxing the soil back to life, arranging clay pots in careful rows. It was the one place where she didn't feel like a guest. She was kneeling beside a tray of basil sprouts when she heard footsteps on the stone path. Miss Whitmore. She turned and squinted into the sunlight. The voice was familiar, but she hadn't expected to see him here. Noah Jameson. He stood in a crisp dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, a messenger bag slung over one shoulder. Her stomach flipped. "Noah," she breathed. How did you—" "Your father," he said. "I just finished my rotation at the hospital. I saw your name listed as emergency contact and I figured I'd check in." Grace stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands on her jeans. "Is he all right?" Noah nodded. "No change, but stable. They're starting to talk about physical therapy options." "That's a good sign." She let out a shaky breath. "Thank you." His eyes swept over the greenhouse. "You've been busy." "It's my therapy." He smiled, the kind that reached his eyes. The kind she remembered. "You look different," he said. "Different how?" "Like someone trying very hard to look like she belongs." That stung more than she expected. "I'm married," she said, not quite able to meet his gaze. He didn't flinch. "So I heard." There was a pause. Too many memories in the quiet. "I didn't mean to show up uninvited," he said. "But I wanted to see if you were okay." "I'm not sure I know the answer to that." He nodded. "If you ever need to talk, I'm still me. Same number. Same terrible coffee preferences." She smiled, despite herself. "Still too much cream? Not enough actual coffee?" Some things never change. They stood for a moment, caught between what was and what couldn't be. "Take care of yourself, Grace," he said softly. And then he was gone. She stayed in the greenhouse until the light faded, her thoughts tangled and brittle. That night, as she returned to the house, she found Grant in the study, seated behind a massive oak desk. Papers lined the surface in neat stacks. He didn't look up when she entered. "I ran into an old friend today," she said. Still, no response. "From before all this," she added. Silence. Grace stepped closer. "You don't have to ignore me every time I speak." "I'm busy," he said without inflection. "You're always busy." He finally looked up, eyes sharp. "Did you come in here to start a fight?" "No," she said, standing her ground. "I came to remind you that we're supposed to act married. That includes the illusion of conversation." He set his pen down. "You want conversation?" he said, standing. "All right. What do you want to talk about? How much you hate this arrangement? How you wish you'd never signed your name on that paper?" She blinked, taken aback by the sudden heat in his voice. "I don't hate it," she said quietly. "I just don't want to disappear inside of it." Grant exhaled. Long, controlled. "This gala is critical," he said. "Everything rides on how we present ourselves. There are eyes watching. Investors, donors, the press." "And what about me?" she asked. "Who watches out for me in all of this?" His expression changed, barely, but she saw it. Something cracked. "I'm not used to anyone asking that," he said. The silence between them shifted. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I." And that, oddly, felt like the first honest thing they'd said to each other in days. She stepped closer. "Then maybe we figure it out," she said. "Together." He nodded once. Not agreement. Not surrender, but the beginning of something softer. Something almost real. Grace left the study and returned to her room. The echo of that moment still wrapped around her like a second skin. Outside her window, Miss Fern stood tall and green beneath the stars. Grace adjusted the pearl clasp at the back of her neck, hands trembling slightly as she studied herself in the mirror. The gown fit like it was sewn into her skin, soft ivory satin that swept the floor, a low back, delicate beading at the waist. Timeless, elegant. Terrifying. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. "Don't forget to smile," Celeste said gently from behind her. "Not the kind you fake in pictures, the kind that makes people think they know something about you." Grace glanced at her reflection again. And what if they don't? Then you've done it right. The car waiting outside the estate purred like a sleeping animal. Grant stood near it, dressed in a charcoal tuxedo that seemed to drain the warmth from the humid night air. He looked effortless, sharp lines. Barely there, Cologne. Control stitched into every thread. He opened the car door for her, hand extended. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, placing her hand in his anyway. They didn't speak during the drive. Grace watched the street lamps pass like flickering stars, her pulse tapping against her ribs. She could already hear the music, the laughter, the soft clink of champagne flutes, and curated conversations. The Callahan Foundation Gala was Savannah's most photographed event. Grant's entire board would be there, along with socialites, press, and politicians. It wasn't just a party. It was a parade of power, and she was walking straight into it as his wife. The ballroom was breathtaking, a cathedral of glass and gold. Crystal chandeliers floated above them like ice. Waiters moved like shadows, carrying silver trays. Every person seemed impossibly perfect, except her. Grace stepped in beside Grant, anchoring herself with slow, deep breaths. People turned. Eyes followed. A few murmurs. A few phones discreetly raised. Grant leaned toward her. "You're doing fine. I haven't done anything yet. You showed up. That's half the job." She swallowed hard. "And the other half? Making them forget you weren't born for this." A man approached. Tall, silver hair, a navy suit that whispered wealth. "Grant, there you are," he said, clapping him on the shoulder. "And this must be your bride." "Finally," Grace smiled. "Grace Callahan. Daniel Hawthorne, board chair. Been waiting to meet the woman who convinced our Ice King to defrost." Grant didn't flinch, but his jaw shifted slightly. Grace reached out, shook Daniel's hand. "It's a pleasure." They moved through the crowd, the buzz rising around them like bees. Grace was passed from hand to hand. Compliments, air kisses, polite curiosity veiled as conversation. But underneath it all, she could feel it. Judgment. Disbelief, speculation, and one set of eyes that burned more than the rest. Cynthia Callahan stood near the champagne fountain, dressed in sleek black, lips painted a severe red. She hadn't approached yet, but her presence was like a blade waiting to be drawn. Grace tried to keep her focus steady. Smile, nod, float. Then came the voice she didn't want to hear. "Well, well." Grace turned. Bethany Fields. Of course, Bethany was everything Grace wasn't. Bold, loud, camera-ready. The queen of Savannah's event scene. And once, long ago, they'd been friendly, until competition sharpened their edges. "I almost didn't recognize you," Bethany said, swirling her drink. "You clean up so well." Grace smiled. "Even miracles have deadlines." Bethany leaned closer, voice low. "Does it feel strange? Knowing everyone's wondering what you had to promise to land him?" Grace's spine stiffened. "You mean aside from a signature?" Bethany laughed. "Oh, Grace." Always the charming one. Before she could reply, Grant appeared beside her, wine glass in hand. "Bethany." "Grant," she purred. "Congratulations. Though I must admit, I never took you for the sentimental type." "I'm not," he said coolly. "But I do have excellent instincts." He placed the wine in Grace's hand, then brushed his fingertips against the small of her back. "Barely there." "Intentional." Bethany raised an eyebrow. "Well, I hope the marriage is as flawless as the dress." Then she was gone, leaving perfume and bitterness in her wake. Grace turned to Grant. "You didn't have to rescue me." He sipped his drink. "I wasn't rescuing you. I was reminding her who won." She blinked. "That's not why I'm here." "No," he said quietly. "But it helps." The rest of the night passed in glitter and glass. Grace danced with donors, laughed when she was supposed to, and posed for the press with a smile she wore like armor. But it wasn't until they stepped outside, hours later, into the quiet hush of night, that she finally exhaled. The car was waiting. Grant paused before opening the door. "You were remarkable tonight." She looked at him. "Do you mean that? I don't say things I don't mean." She studied his face. The mask was off. Just for a second. Just enough to see the man underneath. "Then say something real," she said. "Anything." He hesitated. "I didn't expect this to matter," he admitted. "Not any of it. Not the dress. Not the night. Not you." Grace's breath caught. "But it does," he added softly. "And I don't know what to do with that." Neither of them moved. The street was silent. And for the first time, the space between them wasn't cold. It was charged, alive. "Then we figure it out," she whispered. He opened the door. She stepped in. And for the first time since they signed the papers, she didn't feel like a visitor. She felt like something was beginning. Something real. Something neither of them had planned for. The morning after the gala, the mansion was too quiet. Grace padded barefoot through the halls, the faint hum of the house pressing against her skin like static. The memory of last night clung to her like perfume. Soft glances, barely there touches, Grant's voice low and almost tender. And that look, the way he'd said it mattered. She wasn't sure what scared her more, that it might be true, or that it might not. In the greenhouse, the air smelled of damp soil and new beginnings. She crouched beside Miss Fern, brushing her fingers along the rim of the pot. The little plant had grown stronger than she expected. Green, upright, resilient. It didn't apologize for taking up space. Grace stood, brushing her hands against her jeans. She turned, and startled. Grant was at the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I didn't want to startle you," he said, voice low. "You just did." He stepped inside, carefully navigating between the seedlings and pots she'd arranged in the past week. He handed her a cup. She took it, still cautious. "Is this a social visit or business?" "Neither." "Or both?" He looked around. "This place is different with you in it." "It's alive," she said. "Everything's allowed to breathe here." He nodded slowly. "I remember my mother sitting right there." He pointed to the bench in the corner. "She used to talk to the orchids like they were people." Grace smiled. "Smart woman." He looked at her. "You remind me of her." Her breath caught in her throat. "You've never said that before. I've never seen anyone revive this place before either." The silence stretched, comfortable. And then, Grant. They both turned. Cynthia stood just outside the door, framed by sunlight. Her black linen dress fluttered in the breeze, her heels unforgiving on the stone path. She didn't smile. "I wasn't aware we were hosting garden parties now." Grace straightened. "It's not a party. I spend time here." "I see," Cynthia replied coolly. "How charming." Grace stepped forward. "Is there something you needed?" Cynthia's gaze flicked to Grant. "I came to speak with my son." Grant's jaw tightened. "Say it here." Her lips pursed. "Very well." "The board was pleased with the gala, impressed by your presentation. But a few of them have asked questions. About the suddenness of the marriage, about her." Grace felt the heat rise in her chest. Grant's voice was steady. "Our arrangement is none of their concern." "Oh, but it is," Cynthia said smoothly. "They see everything, and some are suggesting it feels staged." Grace stiffened. "Because it was fast? Because it doesn't feel authentic?" Grace stepped closer. "Then maybe they're not looking closely enough." Cynthia raised a perfectly arched brow. "And perhaps you're not hiding the cracks as well as you think." Grant moved between them. "That's enough." But the damage had already started. Cynthia's gaze swept the greenhouse once more. "Do what you want with this place. But don't mistake flowers for permanence." And with that, she turned and walked away. Silence fell again. Grace set her coffee down with shaking hands. "She doesn't think I'm good enough." "She doesn't think anyone is," Grant said quietly. Grace turned to him. "Is that why you are the way you are? Because she raised you to believe love is a weakness?" Grant didn't answer right away. His shoulders lifted, then dropped. "My father left when I was 11. She never talked about it, never said his name again. Just filled the space he left with expectations and silence." Grace swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." "She doesn't want me happy," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "She wants me untouchable." Grace moved closer. "And what do you want?" He looked at her then. Really looked. "I don't know," he said. "But when I watch you in here, with your hands in the dirt and your eyes lit up over a sprout. I want to learn. The weight of it hit her all at once. Not the confession, the honesty behind it. She reached out, brushing her fingers lightly against his. You're allowed to want more, Grant. You're allowed to feel. He didn't pull away, not this time. That night, Grace returned to her room and found an envelope on her pillow. Inside, a note in Grant's handwriting. For what it's worth, I think you're the only thing in this house that's ever truly been alive. She stared at the words, her heart thudding loud in the stillness. Miss Fern rustled softly by the window, and for the first time, Grace wasn't afraid of what came next. She was afraid of what might grow if she stayed. The kitchen was quiet when Grace walked in, barefoot, hair still damp from her morning shower. Early sunlight slipped through the windows, casting gold on the tiled floor and catching in the steam rising from the kettle. The house was still, unusually so, like it was holding its breath. She was halfway through pouring hot water over a tea bag when she heard it. Music. Faint. From the west wing. Curious, she followed the sound down the hall, past the study, through the formal dining room, and into a space she hadn't explored before. The doors were open. Inside, the piano room. Grant sat at the bench, back straight, fingers moving with startling softness over ivory keys. The melody was slow, aching, not classical, not precise, just felt. He didn't notice her at first, and she didn't announce herself. She watched as his shoulders moved slightly with the rhythm, his head bowed. Vulnerability hung in the air like dust in morning light. She'd never seen him like this. No suit. No mask, just a man with a melody and something heavy in his chest. When the last note faded, she stepped forward. I didn't know you played. He turned just a little, no surprise on his face, just calm, like he'd known she was there all along. I don't, he said quietly. Not well. It didn't sound that way. He stood slowly, his fingers brushing over the closed keys. My mother played every morning. Before breakfast. After she died, the room stayed locked for years. I only started coming back a few months ago. Grace stepped beside him, careful not to break whatever quiet spell was holding them both. She taught you? He nodded once. Bits and pieces. I forgot most of it. But sometimes it comes back, like muscle memory. Or maybe just ghosts. She looked at him, softening. It doesn't sound like ghosts. It sounds like remembering. He glanced down, hands in his pockets. I don't remember her being happy, though, just determined to survive grief. Grace said nothing. There was too much to say, and none of it would land right if she rushed. Instead, she reached out and pressed one key, a low, warm note that echoed gently. You don't have to survive the same way, she said. You can live through it instead. He looked at her again. This time something cracked. I'm trying. They stood in silence, close, but not touching. The moment stretched, filled with things neither of them could quite name. I was going to make breakfast, Grace said softly, stepping back. Join me? He hesitated. Then nodded. In the kitchen, the tension shifted. Less formality, more warmth. She pulled out a pan, cracked eggs, started whisking without asking. Grant leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her with something that looked a little like awe. You do this often? He asked. Cook? Move around a kitchen like it belongs to you. She smiled without looking up. Where I come from, the kitchen is the heart of the house. And here, the house has a lot of walls. I'm just trying to find the ones that open. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. She slid eggs onto 2 plates, added toast and fruit from the fridge, and set everything down on the sun-warmed breakfast nook. No silver trays, no staff. Just real food on real plates. "Sit," she said, already pouring orange juice. He did. They ate quietly at first. Then came the questions. "What was your favorite subject in school?" "English," she said. "I loved stories. Still do." "Least favorite?" "Math," she admitted, laughing. "Numbers don't listen the way words do." He smiled at that. "You'd hate my world." "Probably. But maybe it needs someone like me." He didn't argue. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen. Noah Jameson. She ignored it. Grant saw. "Everything okay?" "Just someone from my old life," she said, not offering more. He didn't press. But the quiet that followed was heavier than before. She pushed her plate away. "Thank you for coming into the greenhouse yesterday. I should have come sooner." "Why didn't you?" He looked at her. "Because I thought you'd be like everything else in this house. Temporary." She blinked. "And now?" she whispered. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Now I'm not so sure." Something in her chest gave way. Not broke. Opened. She stood slowly, clearing the plates with trembling hands. He moved to help, took a dish from her hand, their fingers brushing. The air shifted. "Grace," he said, voice low. She turned to him, but before he could say anything more, Celeste appeared in the doorway. "Apologies," she said, calm as always. "Mr. Callahan, you have a call from the Atlanta office." "They say it's urgent." Grant held Grace's gaze for one long second, then nodded. "I'll be back," he said softly. She watched him go. And as the door closed behind him, she realized something had changed. Quietly. Irrevocably. She wasn't surviving this house anymore. She was starting to belong to it. And maybe, just maybe, it was starting to belong to her. Grace opened her inbox out of habit, not expectation. Her tea sat untouched beside her laptop, steam curling softly in the morning air. The greenhouse had become her sanctuary, but this morning she'd opted for the little corner of the sunroom instead. Glass all around her, the light pouring in like grace itself. Her heart stuttered when she saw the subject line. Regarding Mrs. Callahan, anonymous tip. She clicked. Inside was a link. No message. No signature. Just a link that led to a local gossip blog. She hesitated for a breath, then clicked. There it was. The perfect wife? Or the perfect distraction? A grainy photo. Grace in the greenhouse laughing, soil on her cheek, arms crossed with Noah Jameson. Another. At the hospital entrance, Noah's hand on her lower back. The headline below screamed the subtext loud and clear. Grace wasn't just a mystery wife. She was potentially a scandal. She slammed the laptop shut. The air in the room changed, not because of the article, but because of the weight pressing on her chest. That creeping dread that she knew too well. When something good starts to bloom, and the world reaches in with cold fingers to crush it. She didn't even hear the footsteps until Celeste appeared in the doorway. "I'm sorry," Celeste said softly. "I tried to intercept it before it reached the internal press list, but someone leaked it directly." Grace stood slowly. "Grant saw it. He's in the boardroom now." "I don't know what's been said." Grace didn't wait for more. She moved quickly, barefoot across the wood floors, heart pounding with every step. Down the hall. Past the portraits. Toward the one part of the house she never entered uninvited. The doors were already open. Inside, Grant stood at the head of the long table, sleeves rolled up, phone in one hand, tension wound tight through his shoulders. 4 members of his board were seated, Daniel Hawthorne among them. Brows furrowed, screens lit with the same image Grace had just seen. When he saw her, his expression didn't shift. But the silence in the room doubled. Grace's voice was calm, but it shook at the edges. "I didn't know anyone was taking photos." Grant set the phone down. "I know. Then why do they look like an accusation?" Daniel leaned forward, hands folded. "Because, Mrs. Callahan, public image is fragile. And in a marriage as sudden as yours, people notice things." Grace's eyes didn't leave Grant. "Say something." He didn't speak. That silence hit harder than anything else. She turned slowly, leaving the room without a word, but not without pain. Back in the greenhouse, the warmth felt different, like a lie. Like a memory of peace instead of the real thing. Noah wasn't the problem. The world was. The board, the press, the people waiting for her to be the crack in Grant's perfect facade. She didn't cry. But she did kneel beside Miss Fern and gently brush the new leaves with her thumb, grounding herself in something that grew without permission. The door creaked. Grant. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, letting the quiet settle around them like dust. Finally, "You should have told me." She kept her eyes on the plant. "There was nothing to tell. Noah's an old friend." "That's all." "I know," he said, "but you didn't defend me in that room. I was trying to control the damage." Her breath caught. "So I'm damaged now?" His jaw flexed. "That's not what I meant." She stood slowly. "Then what did you mean, Grant?" "Because all I heard was silence. All I saw was you letting them turn me into a headline." He stepped closer. "I didn't know how to defend something I haven't fully earned yet." She blinked, thrown. "I've asked you to play a role," he said. "I gave you terms, boundaries, and then I started stepping over them." Grace's voice dropped. "Is that what this is to you? A boundary breach?" "No," he said, softer now. "It's more than that." "That's the problem." She turned away, emotions swirling too fast to contain. "I wanted this to be simple," he said. "But you're not simple, Grace. You're kind and brave, and you make this house feel like it's breathing again." Her chest tightened. "I didn't defend you because I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, I'd say something that made it clear I care more than I should." She looked at him then, eyes searching. "Then say it." He stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. "I care," he said, "not because it's convenient, not because it's good optics, but because when I see you in this greenhouse, when I hear you laugh from the kitchen, when I read your notes on my desk about what the staff needs, I care." The words hung there, exposed, fragile. She didn't speak for a long time, then quietly, "I don't need you to care in secret. I need you to choose me in public." His breath hitched. "I will," he said. "I wasn't ready this morning, but I will be tomorrow." "I promise." Grace nodded slowly. "Then tomorrow," she whispered. And for the first time since the contract, they stood in the same room, not as strangers under an agreement, but as two people who had just admitted they were beginning something neither of them could take back. The hospital hallway smelled like antiseptic and lemon-scented floor polish. Grace hated that she recognized it so easily now. She walked slowly, her heels echoing softly as she approached her father's room, hands clutching the strap of her bag with quiet tension. She hadn't told Grant she was coming, not because she was hiding, because this was something she needed to do alone. The nurse gave her a small smile and nodded toward the open door. "He's awake this morning, more alert than yesterday." Grace's heart skipped. "Really? He's not talking much, but he's tracking." "You're getting through." She stepped into the room. The air shifted. Her father sat propped against pillows, the sunlight warming one side of his face. His eyes, still sharp, still kind, met hers the moment she entered. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered. He didn't respond, but he blinked once. Slowly, deliberately, a yes. She moved to his side and gently took his hand. The skin was thinner now, fragile. But his grip, faint as it was, still tried to meet hers. She sat, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know I haven't been here every day, but I've been doing something important," she said softly. "Something I never imagined I'd do." He blinked again. She smiled. "You remember Grant Callahan, don't you?" His expression didn't change, but something in his brow lifted. "Well, I married him." Silence. Grace let out a breath. "It wasn't what you think." At first, it was an agreement, a solution. But now, I don't know what it is, or what I want it to be. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photo, a still from the gala. Someone had printed it and left it on her vanity that morning. She wasn't even sure who. She and Grant, mid-step on the dance floor, not smiling, not posing, just looking at each other like the rest of the world had gone quiet. She set it gently on the tray beside him. "I think he's changing, and I think I'm changing too." Her father's eyes moved toward the photo, then back to her. A faint twitch at the corner of his mouth. She blinked fast. "You always told me to trust my instincts, even when they didn't make sense. Even when they were scary. Well, this is the scariest thing I've ever felt. But it's also the first time in a long time I've felt alive." The nurse stepped in, checked the IV, gave her a smile, and slipped out again. Grace leaned forward. "I love you," she said, voice thick, "and I don't know if you can say it back. But I believe you feel it." A tear slid down his cheek. She wiped it gently with her sleeve and pressed her forehead to his hand. Later, as she walked back out into the parking lot, her phone buzzed. "Unknown number, we need to talk." Key. Her stomach twisted. She knew who it was. The Callahan name didn't need full introductions. Cynthia. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a small corner cafe near the river. It was nearly empty. Mid-afternoon heat kept most people inside. Cynthia wore pale blue and diamonds. Grace wore yesterday's cardigan and tension she couldn't quite shake. "You've made quite the impression," Cynthia said, stirring her tea without looking up. "I wasn't trying to." "That's exactly why it worked." Grace leaned forward. "Why did you call me?" Cynthia finally met her eyes. "Because Grant is slipping, and I need to know if that's your fault, or your intention." Grace laughed softly. "What does that even mean?" "It means I've spent decades building a legacy, and he's walking away from it, skipping investor calls, missing deadlines." Getting emotional. Grace sat straighter. "He's becoming human. That's not a flaw. It is when you've taught him to be untouchable. Maybe that's the problem." Cynthia's eyes flashed. "You think you're saving him?" Grace didn't flinch. "I think he's saving himself. I'm just the first person who didn't ask him to be cold while doing it." Cynthia tapped her manicured nails against the table, then sighed. "You remind me of someone." Grace tilted her head. "His mother?" "No. Me. 40 years ago, Before I learned softness was currency, you spend once and never get back. Grace stood. Then maybe it's time someone rewrote that lesson. She turned to leave, but Cynthia's voice stopped her. He's about to make a choice between what's safe and what's right. Grace looked over her shoulder. I hope he chooses right. When she returned to the estate that evening, Grant was waiting on the back steps of the greenhouse, sleeves rolled, his tie nowhere in sight. I heard you visited your dad, he said. I did. How was he? Present, a little. It was enough. He nodded. And Cynthia? Grace exhaled, sharp as ever. She thinks you're falling apart. Am I? I don't know, she said, walking toward him. But I think you're finally feeling what it means to be whole. He stood, eyes fixed on hers. There's something I want to show you. She followed him to the far corner of the garden, where the hedges hadn't been trimmed in years. Behind them, an old iron gate led to a side building she hadn't noticed before. He pulled a key from his pocket and opened it. Inside, a dusty room. Shelves of old books, a desk, and in the center a small trunk. Grant opened it, lifted a stack of old letters and handed one to her. They're from my grandmother, he said, to my mother. Most were never opened. Grace took one gently. The envelope was brittle. The ink faded. But the words inside, alive. Let him feel, Ellie, Grace read aloud. Let him cry. Let him want. Don't raise him into stone. He's not meant to live in silence. Grant looked at her. I think I've been silent for a long time. Grace's voice trembled. Then say something now. He stepped forward. I'm scared, he said. That this, us, might be real. And if it is, I don't know how to not ruin it. She reached for his hand. Then let's ruin it together, she whispered, eyes shimmering. And build it again, better, honest. Messy. He kissed her hand, slow, deliberate, reverent. I choose you, he said, tomorrow. In public, in front of them all, and for the first time she believed it, every word, every promise, because love had finally stepped through the silence and spoken. The morning came quiet, heavy with possibility. Grace stood in the hallway outside the west study, a mug of chamomile clutched between her hands, the porcelain warm but not comforting. Through the cracked door, she could hear Grant's voice, steady and deliberate, speaking with Daniel Hawthorne and the rest of the board. He was holding court, and this time it wasn't business as usual. I've called this meeting, he said, because there's a decision that needs to be made. And I'm no longer interested in hiding behind performance. Grace's heart picked up speed. I married Grace because she reminds me what life is, he continued. Not a deal. Not a product, not a legacy, but something growing, changing, alive. And whether you understand it or not, she is the most honest thing that's ever happened to me. A beat of silence. She didn't need to hear the rest. She turned and walked away, the words echoing behind her like light spilling under a closed door. An hour later, the house was quiet again. Grant found her in the greenhouse, kneeling beside a row of potted jasmine, dirt under her nails. A new sprout peeking out of the soil. I said it, he said, voice soft. She looked up. They heard me, he added. Did they listen? They will, he said, eventually. She smiled faintly. You didn't have to make it public. I did, he said, walking toward her. Because what we have shouldn't be a secret. Not anymore. Her breath hitched slightly. And what is it we have, Grant? He crouched beside her, eyes level with hers. "Something real," he said. "Something messy and terrifying and, if I'm lucky, permanent." She opened her mouth to speak when she noticed it. An envelope, tucked beside the watering can she'd left on the table. She reached for it, brow furrowed. There was no name, just her. Inside, a single page, typed and cold. "As per Clause 8C of your original agreement, the marriage may be legally dissolved with 30 days' notice. This document serves as the pre-approved draft of said termination, should either party choose to act." Grace froze. At the bottom was Grant's digital signature. She looked up at him slowly, carefully, trying to breathe past the sting. "What is this?" He saw the paper and went still. "It's old," he said quickly. "It was part of the contract before anything was real." She held the page out. "It's dated last week." Grant's mouth opened. No words came out. Her voice cracked. "You told me you chose me, that this was real." "It is," he said. "I haven't submitted it. I forgot it was even sitting in my files." "Files?" she said, standing, the paper shaking in her hands. "Like a spreadsheet? Like something you needed to organize in case I didn't work out?" "No," he said, standing too. "Grace, please. I didn't mean for you to see that." "But you meant to keep it," she whispered. Silence fell again. Different this time. Not heavy with promise, but with fracture. She turned away from him, blinking fast. "Grace," he said gently, "don't let this undo everything." She faced him, eyes glossy. "Then help me understand why, after everything, you still needed a door." Grant ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. "Because I'm scared, Grace. Because I've built my life on exits. On escape plans. And this, what I feel for you, it's the one thing I don't know how to protect." She shook her head, tears falling now. "You don't protect love by preparing to leave it." His voice dropped. "I didn't know how else to survive." Grace swallowed hard, every part of her trembling. "Then maybe you're still not ready for this." The words left her mouth before she could pull them back. Grant's face didn't flinch. But something in him dimmed. "I'll shred the document," he said quietly. "Right now." But she stepped back. "It's not about the paper," she whispered. "It's about the part of you that wrote it." He didn't stop her when she left the greenhouse. Didn't call her name. Didn't follow. Back in her room, she closed the door slowly, then dropped the envelope on her nightstand like it was something toxic. Miss Fern leaned gently toward the window, untouched. But Grace, she felt wilted. This wasn't just a misstep. It was the wound beneath the bloom, the part they hadn't healed yet. The part that still believed love came with terms and a timer. And now, she didn't know whether to wait or walk. The storm came without warning. Grace watched from the greenhouse as the first drops hit the glass like fingertips tapping a warning. Then the sky cracked open, and the rain fell hard, steady, cleansing, unforgiving. Thunder rolled low in the distance, like the ground itself was unsettled. She didn't move. The door behind her had stayed closed since the moment she walked away from Grant, and she hadn't heard his voice since. Maybe he knew she needed space, or maybe he didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure which would hurt more. She sat on the old wooden bench, barefoot, her dress damp from kneeling in the soil earlier. Her fingers traced the grooves of the wood absently, but her thoughts spun. The paper. The signature. The fact that part of him had prepared to leave while the other part whispered promises of staying. It wasn't the document itself. It was the truth underneath it, the part of him still waiting for her to disappear. The wind howled against the glass, and for a moment, the greenhouse felt too fragile, like one good gust would scatter everything she'd built inside it. She pressed her palm to the soil beside Miss Fern. The plant was thriving, but she was unraveling. A flash of lightning lit the sky, and then footsteps. She didn't turn, but she knew it was him. He stepped inside slowly, raindrops clinging to his sleeves, hair soaked, shoes muddy. "You're out here," he said softly, as if surprised. "You didn't look very hard." "I didn't want to push." She let the silence answer. He stepped closer, careful. "I shredded it." She kept her eyes on the dirt. "That doesn't fix the part of you that wrote it." "I know." The storm roared, wind shaking the glass panes. Still, she didn't move. "Grace," he said, voice trembling slightly, "I wrote that document the day after the gala, before everything changed. Before the piano, before the breakfast, before your father opened his eyes." She looked at him finally. "Then why didn't you delete it?" "Because I've never had anything I couldn't walk away from," he said, rain sliding down his jaw. "Until you." Her chest tightened. "You terrify me," he whispered. She stood slowly. "Why?" "Because when I'm near you, I want more than success. I want stillness. I want truth. And I've spent my entire life convincing myself those things were distractions." He took a step forward. "But then you showed up, wearing borrowed grace and speaking with a voice I didn't know I needed. And you built something alive in a house I let rot." Grace's throat burned. "And I'm sorry," he said, "for the paper, for the silence, for thinking love needed a contingency plan, another step. I want to be better," he said. "Not for the board. Not for the legacy. For you." Tears welled in her eyes, hot and helpless. "I never needed you to be perfect," she said. "Just honest. I am now." They stood inches apart, rain tapping a rhythm around them, thunder like a heartbeat under the floor. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of his soaked cuff. "You have to trust me with the parts of you that feel unlovable," she whispered, "or I can't stay." He reached for her hand, gently, slowly, like she was light, and he was still learning how to hold something without dimming it. "I do," he said. "I will." The storm cracked again, but this time, she didn't flinch. Grant looked around the greenhouse. At the green, the growth, the quiet magic she'd made. "I want to help you build this," he said. Grace smiled through her tears. "It's already ours." Then she leaned in, slow, certain, and kissed him. No cameras. No terms, no audience, just warmth. And rain, and roots finally breaking through old stone. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "We tell them all. No more contracts. No more pretending, just us." And for the first time since that awful piece of paper, she believed him. Because sometimes storms don't break you. Sometimes they water what's been waiting to bloom. The morning sun slipped through the window slats in narrow golden beams, striping the bedroom walls in quiet light. Grace sat at the edge of the bed, still wrapped in yesterday's emotions, her fingers idly tracing the stitching on the duvet. She could hear the rustle of movement downstairs. Grant, making coffee. The sound felt different now, familiar. Chosen. The air smelled like clean rain and something warm baking in the oven. It was quiet, but not empty. She looked over at the nightstand. A letter sat there, cream envelope. Her name written in careful handwriting she hadn't seen in weeks. She stared for a moment, then reached for it with both hands. Her father. He must have written it during a good day, sometime after his speech started returning. She unfolded the paper slowly, the edges still crisp, and began to read. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, it means I was finally able to put pen to paper again. Thank God for second chances, and for daughters who believe in miracles even when they're tired. She smiled, breath catching. I watched you walk into that hospital room every day like you didn't have the weight of the world on your shoulders. But I know you did. And I know you carried it for both of us. I may not have been able to speak, but I saw everything. I saw how you stood, how you cared. How you didn't flinch when everything around you asked you to give up. Grace blinked fast. There's something I want to say now that I couldn't before. You're not meant to save everyone, baby girl. You're meant to live. You're allowed to want things just for yourself, even love. Her heart pulled tight. I don't know the man you married. Not truly, but I've seen the way your face softens when you talk about him, and that tells me enough. Just promise me you won't dim your light for anyone, not even someone who's still learning how to shine beside you. She set the letter down slowly, pressing it to her chest. A knock. She turned, wiping her eyes. Grant stood in the doorway, 2 mugs in hand. He noticed the envelope instantly. Your dad? He asked. She nodded, voice thick. He wrote it last week. The nurses helped him. He crossed the room and handed her one of the mugs. I made it how you like it, he said quietly. Too much cinnamon, not enough sugar. She smiled. Perfect. They sat beside each other, quiet at first, sipping, breathing. Then Grant cleared his throat. I spoke to the foundation board this morning. She turned, surprised. Already? He nodded. Told them I'm stepping down. Her eyebrows lifted. What? Why? Because I want to build something else, something real, and I don't want it to be built on a lie. Our marriage started as a deal, Grace. I don't want that to be the legacy. Her voice dropped. Are you sure? He looked at her, really looked at her. I'm more sure of this than I've been of anything in my life. The words landed with weight and clarity. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. So, what now? He hesitated, then reached into his pocket. She pulled back slightly, brows drawing together, until she saw it. Not a ring box, a key. He held it out. To the greenhouse. Her brows furrowed, lips parting. But I know, he said. But I want it to be yours, officially. Every deed, every inch. It's not part of the estate anymore, it's part of you. She took the key with trembling fingers. I thought you said you weren't good at grand gestures. I'm not, he said. But I'm getting better. She leaned in slowly, her forehead resting against his. There was no need for a kiss, no need for fireworks. This was quieter than that, stronger. Later that afternoon, they stood together outside the greenhouse, hands intertwined. The rain had left the soil soft, the air damp and fresh. New blossoms peeked out from pots that once held nothing but dry stems. Grace opened the door with her new key. It clicked softly, like a promise. They walked in together, sunlight filtering through the cleaned glass, warm on their faces. Grant looked around, then back at her. This place feels like you. She turned to him. It feels like us now. He paused, then reached into his coat pocket one more time. This time, it was a ring. Simple, gold, no diamonds. Just warmth and intention. I don't want a contract, he said. Or a deadline. Or anything that says this ends. She didn't cry. Not this time. She simply nodded, tears shining but not falling. And when he slipped the ring onto her finger, it felt less like a beginning and more like a homecoming. Because love, real love, doesn't arrive with thunder. It grows quietly, rooted, and ready. It was late afternoon when Grace walked into the church for the first time in weeks. The pews were empty, dust dancing in the sunbeams slicing through the stained glass windows. The silence was familiar, soft, almost sacred. She stood at the back for a moment, her hand brushing the smooth wood of the last pew. Then she walked slowly down the aisle toward the altar where her father had once stood, voice ringing through the sanctuary like a lighthouse in fog. The pulpit was draped in white linen, fresh lilies in a vase beside it. Someone had been tending the space. She smiled, guessing it was one of the older women from the congregation, someone who didn't wait for permission to keep things beautiful. She sat in the front pew and let her eyes close. Everything was quiet inside her for the first time in a long while. The sound of the door creaking open behind her didn't startle her. She knew his footsteps now, could pick them out of a crowded room. Grant slid into the pew beside her, not close, not far. Just enough. "I thought you might come here," he said softly. "This was the first place I ever stood up and spoke in front of people," she murmured. "I was 8, a Christmas pageant. My knees shook the entire time. I would have liked to see that." She looked at him, smiled gently. "I wore angel wings made out of old wire hangers and white pantyhose. You really missed something special." He chuckled. "Sounds unforgettable." They sat in silence for a while. Then she asked, "What happens next?" He didn't answer right away. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about what we're building, about what I used to think legacy meant." She turned toward him slightly. "I thought it had to be about name, money, what I left behind after I was gone. But that wasn't legacy. That was just fear dressed up as ambition." He looked at her. "You changed that." Her voice caught. "How?" "You showed me that legacy can be built in a garden, in a kitchen, in a morning where you make someone laugh even when they're hurting." Her hand found his. "I want that kind of legacy," he said. "With you." She squeezed his hand. "I want to open the greenhouse to the community," he continued. "Workshops, seed sharing, healing gardens. Your father's name on the plaque outside the door." Grace's lips parted. "You're serious?" He nodded. "It's already started. I had the lawyers draw up the paperwork. You'll be director. You'll decide what grows." Emotion rose fast in her throat. "Grant, I don't know what to say. Just say yes." She blinked back tears and whispered, "Yes." He leaned closer, and I spoke to Cynthia. Her breath caught. "Oh?" "She's not thrilled. But she's quiet, which is her version of surrender." Grace smiled. "Progress." "She said something strange, though," Grant added. "She said, maybe she's the softness you needed. I spent my life afraid of softness. Maybe she won't." Grace's eyes shimmered. "Maybe she sees you changing." He exhaled. "I feel it. I'm not afraid of it anymore." They sat in silence again, the kind that didn't press or demand. It just let them breathe. Then he pulled something from his jacket pocket. A folded letter. "Your father gave me this," he said. "He asked me not to read it until I was sure." Grace took it with trembling fingers, opened it slowly. "Grant, you have something of mine. My daughter's heart. And I trust you with it, but only if you understand It's not something that needs saving. She was whole before she met you. If she chooses to share her wholeness with you, that's not a gift. It's a miracle. Don't worship her. Don't protect her. Just stand beside her. And when the days are long and the soil is dry, water what you've planted together. Love is not loud. It grows in the quiet, like roots, like grace. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She folded the letter slowly and held it to her chest. Grant didn't speak. He didn't need to. Outside the windows, the light began to shift. Longer shadows, deeper gold. Evening stretching its arms across the sanctuary. Grace stood and walked to the altar, her hand trailing the edge of the pulpit. Grant followed. She turned to him, eyes glassy but calm. "I want to renew our vows," she said. "Not for them, for us." "For what this is now," he nodded. "Tell me when." "Soon," she said, "but not in a ballroom. Not in a courthouse." "Where then?" She smiled, heart full. "The greenhouse." And for the first time, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt like soil that had finally been turned over, waiting for the right hands to begin again. The greenhouse had never looked more alive. Sunlight poured through the glass panes like something sacred, warming every inch of the room with soft gold. The jasmine vines reached high, blooming along the rafters in gentle whites and pale purples. Rows of terracotta pots lined the tables, filled with herbs, wildflowers, and seedlings waiting to find their permanent home. It smelled like soil and new beginnings. Grace stood just beyond the threshold, dressed in soft ivory linen, her hair gathered loosely at the nape of her neck. There were no sequins, no stage, no crowd. Just people she loved, people who had watched her grow. Lila sat near the back, dabbing at her eyes before the ceremony even began. Reverend Whitmore sat at the front, beside a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "The Whitmore Garden, a place for growth and grace." He was quiet, but alert, his eyes bright and full. His recovery had been slow but steady, and today, he had asked to walk her down the aisle himself. He would only make it halfway, but that was far enough. Grace glanced down at her bouquet, small, simple. Daisies and eucalyptus, tied with twine. In her other hand she held his arm. Steady. Familiar. "You ready, sweetheart?" her father asked, his voice still a little raspy, but sure. "I am," she whispered. And together, step by step, they began down the makeshift aisle lined with planters and benches borrowed from local nurseries. Friends, neighbors. Volunteers from the community garden sat shoulder to shoulder, wiping their eyes as they watched her move forward with grace, toward the man waiting at the center of it all. Grant stood beside a single wooden arch covered in climbing honeysuckle, wearing a navy jacket, sleeves rolled to his forearms. No tie. Just his heart, in plain sight. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a man who had finally stepped into the light. When her father paused, Grant stepped forward, offering his hand. Grace kissed her father's cheek, then took Grant's hand without hesitation. The moment was quiet. Reverent. No one moved. They faced each other as the officiant, an old friend of Reverend Whitmore's, smiled gently and spoke with the kind of calm only time could teach. "Today," he said, "we witness not a contract, but a choice. A vow that isn't legal. It's spiritual, emotional, rooted." Grant's eyes never left hers. Grace's voice was soft, but certain as she spoke. "I didn't come here looking for love," she said. "I came carrying responsibility, fear, questions I didn't have answers to. And what I found, what I never expected, was a partner who helped me put down the weight I wasn't meant to carry alone. She paused, breath catching. You let me be strong without hardening, gentle without fading. And every day, you show me what it means to grow beside someone who's still learning, but never stops trying. Grant swallowed, his voice thick as he began. You were never a rescue. You were the reminder that life isn't supposed to be built from strategy or silence. It's meant to be lived, messy, real, together. You gave me something I never had before, the courage to feel. And I will spend every day giving that courage back to you. Grace blinked, tears slipping freely now, no shame in them. The officiant stepped forward, voice quiet. Do you choose one another again? This time not out of need, but love? I do, they said together. The crowd exhaled, warm laughter mixing with the scent of lavender and sunlight. They kissed, not rushed, not posed, just enough. And when they pulled back, the entire greenhouse seemed to bloom a little brighter. Afterward, there was lemonade in mason jars, laughter under the oaks, children picking petals and scattering them like joy. The community wandered through the garden, reading signs about soil health and memory planting. The volunteers pointed out where the summer crops would go, where the benches would sit. It was no longer a project. It was a home. Grace sat with her father on a bench near the greenhouse entrance as the sun dipped lower. She looks different, he said, nodding toward Miss Fern, sitting proudly in the corner of the entry table. She made it, Grace smiled, even after everything. He looked at her, eyes soft. So did you. A little while later, Grant found her beneath the old willow near the edge of the garden. He knelt in the grass, pulling off his jacket and folding it neatly beside him. She sat beside him, leaning into his shoulder. They watched the last of the guests wander toward their cars, laughter still floating on the breeze. Do you ever think, she asked, about how all of this started? Every day. I almost said no. He smiled. I almost hoped you would. She turned to him. And now? He reached for her hand. Now, I wake up hoping you'll say yes again. Every morning. She kissed his cheek. The willow branches swayed above them, rustling like pages turning. And in the hush that followed, Grace closed her eyes and breathed in deep. Not fear. Not uncertainty, just jasmine, sun-warmed soil. And him. She didn't need a castle or a contract. She had a garden, and the kind of love that didn't promise perfection, only presence. Love that stayed. Rooted, chosen, real. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.